Well, before we begin looking at this gospel, I do want to take this time to thank Pastor Chuck for allowing me to bring today's gospel message to you. And thank you to all who are participating in this worship service. And thank you to you who are joining us from wherever you are right now listening. This is in no way even remotely in my comfort zone. I would rather be talking about data distributions and hypothesis testing than bring you the message. I also want to acknowledge Pastor Chuck and thank him, I think, for giving me such a non-controversial gospel, such as today's. I might have asked him a couple months ago that my only request was for an easy gospel to preach on. So thank you for giving me this hanging curveball for me to hit it out of the park. Will you please join me in prayer before we begin? Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Well, about a month and a half ago, I was in my backyard on a Sunday morning finishing the foundation work for our yard's third raised garden bed. These garden beds were massive, a 4-foot wide by 5-foot long rectangular bed with 2-foot radius semicircles on each end. They were built 16 inches high, all out of landscaping block. To change this section of our yard into our dream design took us almost 2 weeks of solid work, not to mention the frustration of running into problems along with the creativity necessary to address them. To build this garden oasis dream, a lot of preparation needed to be made before we even laid the first brick. We had to dig trenches for the retaining wall, level them so the base of the retaining wall would look like it is at a consistent level, actually build that wall, extend the irrigation system to provide each bed with water, level the ground, build the planters, fill those planters with dirt, and fill the remaining area surrounding the garden bed with landscape rock. Each of these steps had to be carefully thought out for this project to stand the test of time. We don't want to have to fix things falling apart after a year. This is supposed to last us the rest of our time at this home. We want to enjoy the labors of our hard work, not work harder than ever to keep it where it is. So I began thinking about walls and why we want them. I came up with 3 rationales for walls, rationales that cover at least my experience with them. We build walls for security. We build walls for structure. We build walls for serenity. Walls are great for security. They help keep unwanted things from entering our space. It is a barrier placed to protect our sense of safety and comfort. We have walls in our house to protect us from the weather, creatures of all shapes and sizes, and intruders from taking our stuff. Walls provide structure, defining spaces and what they are for. In my garden, the wall provides a structure to hold in the dirt that supports our garden beds. The walls of the garden bed hold in the good soil for growing plants. It also defines where those plants should go. The walls in our house define the purposes for each part of our house. Walls can define territories and spaces, especially good when you have children getting on each other's nerves. And these walls also help us to maintain order, like keep your belongings in your room. Order and structure help us relax. And this leads us to our final rationale for walls, serenity. With the work in our garden done, we can relax and enjoy the beauty our walls have given us. We don't have to think about what we need to do next. To borrow a phrase from a well-known infomercial host, we can set it and forget it. However, walls that hold people out also hold people in. Walls that provide structure and define spaces can also become rigid and oppressive. Walls that give us a sense of peace can also make us complacent, lazy, and numb to what occurs outside those walls. We have all built walls in our spiritual lives. While walls do provide many benefits, like in Proverbs 4:23, where it tells us to keep our hearts with all vigilance, for from it flows the spring of life, they can also be traps which prevent us from following Christ. Our gospel today highlights how our structures and walls prevents us from fulfilling our calling to follow Christ. Jesus takes Peter to task, using words that would make any one of us cower into a corner. "Get behind me, Satan." When we consider where Peter is coming from, it places us right in Peter's shoes and really feel the weight of Jesus' words. Well, let's go back to last week's gospel and look at where Peter's head is. This is starting in verse 13. "Now when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Well, some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Simon Peter answered, 'You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God.' And Jesus answered him, 'Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven.'" Peter's got to be riding a high note right now. It's like he aced that test and was recognized for it in front of everyone. Jesus is the Messiah, the promised one, who Peter thought would free the people of Israel from tyranny, the tyranny of the Romans. The prevailing thought surrounding the Messiah was the deliverance of their lands from the military occupation of the Roman Empire. So when Jesus began explaining to them that he must go to Jerusalem to die, well, it went against everything Peter believed. Peter had walled Jesus into a construct that fit his narrative, his plan. Peter had to correct Jesus, especially since Jesus had set Peter apart from the rest of the disciples. But Jesus was having none of it. "Get behind me, Satan." His next word sets up our calling and how we fall short of it every day. "You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." We can't wall Jesus in to fit our perfect scenario or narrative. Jesus is not meant to serve us. We are to serve him. We must break down our futile constructs about who Jesus is and what we should do to serve him. I imagine Jesus put in a little extra into his rebuke of Peter so that all the disciples can clue in. And as children of God, we should clue into this as well. Jesus says, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." To follow Christ means a hard road. To follow Christ means sacrifice. To follow Christ means suffering. "Get behind me, Satan." We can't follow Christ if we get out in front and try to guide Jesus into our walled notions of reality. The reality is we are just as guilty as Peter on a daily basis, getting out of line because we know better. I hear Jesus calling to me, "Get behind me, Josh." Jesus is calling us back in line. Jesus is calling us to follow his example, to follow him. We get out of line every day, and God graciously invites us to fall back in line every day. When we have caused someone pain, we always look for the quick way to make reconciliation. Most of the time, this is to make our pain go away. Like the children of Israel in the Micah reading, we ask God, what do you want me to give up? I could give money to the church, or I could pray for people. Just tell me, what is my consequence for the action so I can move on? To follow Christ is not about fulfilling some checklist steps to ease our conscience. Following Christ is about building relationships with people. Following Christ is about standing with marginalized individuals and groups. Following Christ is about denying our wants. Following Christ is about sacrificing our desires for the sake of others. This is the sacrifice of the cross. Taking up our cross and following Christ is about building relationships with the outcasts, standing with the marginalized. We marginalize people who do not look like us, talk like us, think like us, behave like us. We marginalize based on gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, and political ideology. We prioritize numero uno, ourselves. But God shares with us how we are to follow Christ. We as a congregants of Messiah Lutheran Church have adopted it as our mission verse. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice? Far too long we have stood by while oppression consistently happens to our people of color, LGBTQ, and religious communities. Do is an action word. We cannot be allies. Allies implies we can sit on the sidelines and root for justice. We must have some skin in this game. We must be co-conspirators in the fight for justice. It is time for us to listen to those who are marginalized, stand with them, and acknowledge that following Christ means we must be willing to sacrifice our own interests if it means providing justice for those in need. I read a recent social media post by a Dr. Michael J. Svigel, who I think explains it best. The question should never be, is this action leftist or right-wing? Liberal or conservative? Socialist or capitalist? The question should be, does this action love my neighbor? Look out for their interests more than my own? Manifest the fruit of the Spirit. We must acknowledge how our self-centered priorities have injured others. We should acknowledge that we are worshiping right here in Auburn, which are the lands of various Native American tribal groups, which included the Duwamish, the Skokomish, the Smolkomish, the Stakamish, Twakwamish, Lilliquawamish, and Snoqualmie tribes. Covering up our histories because it makes us feel bad continually perpetuates the injustices experienced by those we marginalize. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness? COVID-19 has redefined how we interact with our neighbors. We have taken preventative measures and politicized them to meet our own desires. We go to the grocery store and label individuals as enemies of science or destroyers of individual freedoms based on whether a mask is worn. We are called to love kindness, not place judgment on people that informs how we interact with them. Our screens have become our lifeline while being shut away due to the pandemic. We have presence, identities, and followings on our social media platforms. We use it to spread information and shed light on inequities and injustice. But we also discriminate behind digital walls of privacy. Instead of engaging in productive dialogue with those who disagree, we unfriend them, unfollow them, block them from our news and activity feeds because we don't like what they have to say. We try to point out why we are right and why those who don't agree with us are idiots. We spend more time on our digital relationships than with in-person relationships. When was the last time you spent a couple hours being present with a person and ignored your phone? Do you check your phone every time it alerts you about something? Showing kindness is being present with them, not distracted by other things. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with our God? We have all built our walls over an extended period of time. We may not even know they exist. We have spent a considerable amount of time constructing our foundations on narratives that on the surface appear to be true, but in reality only accomplish our self-serving ideas and principles. It places us at the center of our thoughts and continues to perpetuate oppression, division, and non-accountability. Discerning God's call sometimes can be challenging. Sometimes that call is in the still small voice Elijah heard on the mountain. This is not one of those times. The murder of George Floyd, the coronavirus, the continual violence, these are life-altering events. Right now is our burning bush moment. How will we respond? Will we respond like Moses, finding every excuse to maintain the status quo because it's comfortable and it keeps us safe? Or will we choose to follow Christ, smashing our walls which try to hold Christ in for ourselves? To follow Jesus, we must sacrifice or deny ourselves, take up our cross, and get behind the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Amen.